Hey guys, and welcome back to my CCNA 200-301 course. Patrice is here, and in this video we are going to review NTP configuration and verification. Are you ready? Let's get started. NTP is the protocol that helps you to sync different systems and services, including networking gear clock. One of the most crucial use cases of NTP is when you're dealing with logs. Let's assume that you have a security breach in your system and you want to check different logs in different systems and services to figure out what has happened and when it has happened. But if you have different times on different systems and services, then it's going to be impossible to correlate different logs. So it's very crucial to have a synced log in your systems and services, including networking gear, obviously. NTP stands for Network Time Protocol, and it uses UDP port 123. Cisco devices can have two different NTP roles. They can either be NTP server only, which in this case they have to get their time from their local hardware or from other mechanisms other than NTP, and they can be server and client. So they cannot be merely client, either NTP server only or NTP server and client. In the second situation, when your device is NTP server and client, first it plays the client role and gets the time from an NTP source or NTP server, and then it can play the NTP server role and give the time to other devices. All right, this is our today's scenario. We have 5 routers, and router 4 is the NTP server only router, which is going to be our main time source. And the rest of the routers are going to be NTP server and client. It is always recommended to have multiple NTP servers configured on your devices so you have redundancy in case of a failure. But the question is, if we have more than one NTP source, which one shall we pick? Here is when the stratum concept comes to the picture. Stratum is a value or a parameter that determines the precision of an NTP source. And the lower it is, the better. So this number can be something between 1 to 15. And when you configure your device as the NTP server only, you can determine your stratum. And if you don't do that, it's going to pick a default value. Stratum number 16 actually means that if you receive an NTP message from an NTP source that says my stratum is 16, it means that it is not reliable and you shouldn't use it. And even when you configure NTP server, meanwhile the initial conversation happens, you can see that the stratum for that source is 16 until the communication establishes, and then it will be changed. A stratum is working like a distance vector routing protocol, and it increases by 1 on every hop. So for example, if when we configure router 4 as our NTP server, we set the stratum as 3. When it goes to the next router, that stratum gonna be changing to 4. And if we set router 3 as NTP source of router 2, that stratum gonna be 5, and eventually on router 1, it's gonna be 6. There is another path to router 4 for router 1 as well. So here again on router 5, we have stratum 4, and if we go on the other way, it's going to be 5. So when my router has more than one NTP source, the one that has the lowest stratum value will be picked as the NTP source. To have the best outcome of the NTP, it is recommended to configure some parameters before configuring NTP configuration on your devices. The first one is determining what is your time zone, and it depends where you are in the world. You have to configure it accordingly. To configure that, we go to global configuration mode, and the first command is clock and then time zone and then your time zone. Wherever you are, you have to mention your time zone. For me, it is AEST. And then your time difference with regards to UTC. So if I press question mark here, you can see that where you are or what is your offset from UTC. For me, it is plus 11. If you have minutes as well, you can put minutes here as well. 11 plus 30 minutes, etc. So this is my clock time zone. The next parameter is the summertime. So if you have summertime in your location and the clock changes in summer and winter, this is the parameter that we set. It is clock summertime, again your time zone, and then you have to mention recurring because it is happening every year. And the final recommendation is set your clock as close as possible manually. So we say in privilege mode, we say clock set, and it has to be in 24-hour version or format. For me at the moment, it is 15, 20, and 20 minutes, hour, minute, and seconds. And then it is 2nd of March 2025. The closer your current clock, it's gonna be synchronized faster with NTP server. I configured those parameters on the rest of the routers in the backend, and now we start from router 4, which is going to be our NTP server only router. To make your device as the NTP server only, the command is NTP master. And in front of NTP master, you can mention your stratum number, which is something from 1 to 15, or just press enter. If you press enter, the stratum number that will be assigning to this NTP server going to be 8 by default. But here I'm going to say stratum 3. And the other thing I want to do here is setting the interface or NTP source address of that one. For example, your router here may have more than one interface and it will be having more than one IP address. No matter which one you will be using, the thing is, if this interface goes down, for example, this IP address, which is in 192.168.3.0 range, in this case is 3.2, it's not going to be accessible. So the other resources that is using this IP address as the NTP source will be losing the NTP source. And this is not what actually we want, because this router going to be accessible from another path. So they still can have their NTP source, but if this interface goes down, then that IP address is not available. So it is recommended to use a loop back interface as the NTP source address. And on this router, if I run show IP interface brief, you can see that I configured a loopback 0 interface and assigned an IP address on it. And then I added it to the OSPF section as well. So all of these other routers know how to reach out to 10.1.1.1. So here I'm going to say NTP source and then the interface. And the interface is loopback 0. When you want to configure your device as NTP server and client, the configuration command is NTP server. And this time on router 3, I'm going to say it is 10.1.1.1 is your NTP server. As I mentioned before, once you configure NTP, it's not a very fast protocol and you have to wait. And meanwhile, if you run the troubleshooting command, which are mainly two of them, the first one is show NTP status. You can see that the clock is unsynchronized and the stratum is 16, which means that NTP server is not working yet. And also, if you say show NTP associations, it shows you who is going to be your NTP server. And there is some icons or characters here. So this one means that it is configured, but our eventual situation will be having 1 star at the back of that address, which means that this is our selected NTP servers. And if you have multiple servers, you can see that which one is picked as the main NTP source. And as you can see, it is in initialization stage. For router 5, our NTP server gonna be 10.1.1.1 like router 3 because it has direct connectivity to router 4. On router 2, I would say NTP server 192.168.2.2, which is this interface. Again, if you wanna use that optimal situation, we had to configure a loopback address here as well and configure that loopback as the NTP source. But anyway, it's just a lab. So I say NTP server 192.168.2.2, which is router 3. And finally on router 1, I'm gonna say NTP server 192.168.1.2, which is router 2 here, and NTP server 192.168.4.2, which is router 5 interface here. So now I have 2 NTP servers set up, and as I mentioned, you can have more than 1 NTP server. So here, if I run show running config and have a look at section NTP, you can see that both of them are there, and we can use more than 1 NTP server as our time sources. As I mentioned before, NTP is very slow. So when you configure it, be patient with it because it may take a few minutes for it to fully sync the time on your device. And the more you have the offset from the time you set on the device and the NTP server, it's gonna take more. So be patient. So our verification commands was show NTP status, first one. You can see that on this device, the clock is still unsynchronized. So you have to wait for it. And stratum is 3. And the reference is 127.127.1.1, which is another loopback address that NTP use for internal purposes. So this means that it is referring to its own address, and it is 127.127.1.1. And if we run show NTP associations, this time you can see that things are different, and we have this star here. So as long as you have this star, it means that the communication between your device and NTP source, which here in this case is the server, the router itself, it is fine. So that communication is established. And who is the reference clock? It is the local, which means that your local hardware. Now if I go to router 3 and run show NTP status here, you can see that the time is still unsynchronized and it takes some time. But you see that stratum has changed and it's not 16 anymore, it's 4, because it was 3 on router 4 and now it is 4 on router 3. And you can see that the reference is 10.1.1.1, which is our router 4. And if I run show NTP associations, you can see that there's a star here as well. And this router is now connected to that NTP source. And you can see that the reference clock is that 127.127.1.1, which is this router's internal loopback address. Now, if we go one step further in the hierarchy, I mean going to router 2 as the next hop, and run show NTP status, you can see that it is still unsynchronized. It takes some time, but we're talking about a stratum, and now a stratum is 5. You saw that it was 3 here, 4 here, and now 5 here. And after about half an hour, I reckon this is happening because I'm using an emulated environment. It shouldn't take that much long in real world scenarios. So if I say show NTP associations here, I still have a problem with this source, which means that something is not right with this time source. But anyway, what I want to show you is when you have more than one NTP source, your device will pick the one that has the lowest stratum. So this one has a stratum 4 and this one has a stratum 5. So this one will be picked as the NTP source. And if you run show NTP status here, you can see that your stratum is 5. So this stratum belongs to the device that is actually advertising NTP, which is your neighboring router in this scenario. But this one is your stratum. So you saw that 6 came from the other side by stratum 5, 1 another is myself. So this side gonna be 6 and this side gonna be 5. So it will be picked the one that has the lower stratum. Show NTP associations and show NTP status will check the status of your router with regards to NTP configuration and the status of the communication to the NTP server. But eventually it has to impact your system clock. So how we can verify what time is it on our device? The command is show clock. And with this command, you can figure out if the clock on your device is correct or not. Alright guys, this was our today's video. The exam topic we covered here was 4.2, configure and verify NTP operating in a client and server mode. And in the upcoming video, we'll be talking about NAT concepts. I wish you enjoyed today's video and see you in the next ones.